Good evening. Welcome to Planet Word. My name is Britt Oates, Manager of Public Programs, and on behalf of myself and the entire Planet Word team, we are so excited to welcome you all to tonight's programming event. As part of Planet Word's Having Hard Conversations series, this is What We Say, What They Hear with Deborah Tannen. We'd like to take a moment to give special thanks to our sponsors. The Having Hard Conversations series is being brought to you thanks to the generous support of the IBIS Group. And thank you to WAMU American University Radio for being the media sponsor for this programming event. Today's program will include a discussion between WAMU reporter Sarah Y. Kim and renowned linguist and New York Times bestselling author Deborah Tannen. Please join me in welcoming Planet Word's founder and CEO, Anne Friedman.
Welcome to everybody. I'm thrilled that we have such a full house tonight as we invite Deborah Tannen to participate in our Having Hard Conversations speaking series. First, though, just to stress how happy we are to have funding from the IBIS Group for the refreshments, for recording these important programs, and they're on our YouTube channel afterwards if you'd like to see them or pass them along. I want to just repeat that thank you, and also to WAMU for offering to be our media partner for this conversation and for providing on-air promotion for this evening's program and for providing tonight's moderator, Sarah Y. Kim. Sarah is a general assignment reporter for WAMU. Born in Korea, she worked for the NPR station in Baltimore for 2 years, covering health and housing. She was the editor-in-chief of the Johns Hopkins newsletter and was also a freelance writer for Baltimore Magazine. So we know she's going to ask great questions and help us truly hear the answers in this important conversation. When we first started planning this series and thinking about who we should invite to speak, our first inclination was to invite politicians, political consultants, activists, speechwriters, or even television commentators. Indeed, our first three speakers were Michelle Norris, Tim Shriver, and Van Jones. But then we thought, wait a minute. Let's not forget about the hard conversations that people struggle with every day of their lives. Won't our audiences want to hear some ideas about how to handle those tricky personal types of conversations? Of course. So that meant that we needed to invite sociolinguist Deborah Tannen to speak. Like, duh. And in fact, Deborah has been a great friend of Planet Words from its very inception. Early on, she agreed to be a member of the Planet Word Advisory Board along with her husband. So they are old friends. As a museum that aims to encourage people to pay attention to the words they use, our interests couldn't be more aligned. Professor Tannen wants people to hear themselves and understand how what they say might not be exactly what others hear. The subject of tonight's talk and her newest book. Her interest in gender differences in conversational styles came to the forefront of public awareness with the publication of her most famous book in 2007. That was You Just Don't Understand, Women and Men in Conversation, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 4 years, including 8 months at number 1, which my husband would die for. So that is really amazing. But her interest in conversational styles was laid out before that in earlier books, including That's Not What I Meant, How Conversational Style Makes or Breaks Relationships, which was written in 1986. She had discovered that what part of the country you come from, your ethnic background, age, class, gender, and individual personality could result in different ways of saying what you really mean. As one reviewer put it, knowing what conversational style is and how it works gives you a new way of understanding what goes on when you talk to others. And that understanding gives you tools you can use when you're not happy with the way a conversation or a relationship is going. As a result of her many books and other writing, Deborah has become a much in-demand speaker on TV and radio. And really, we would have had her much sooner, but because she was working on this new book, her 14th, we had to wait until she finished that manuscript to book her. Of course, we couldn't have predicted that when we planned this program weeks ago, that it would end up taking place just when the entire national political scene and attention were focused on how we should speak to one another. Despite real and legitimate disagreements that can make our blood boil and our national temperature rise, we are reminded once again in our too often violence-prone country that in a democracy, we must use our words to listen and speak respectfully, no matter how great our disagreements. Listening respectfully to each other, even to ideas and speakers with whom we vehemently disagree, is how our republic functions and survives. At Planet Word, we believe in the power of words to do good and to build community. But even the best intentioned words will have little power if we can't understand each other. And that's where a wise voice like Deborah Tannen's can play such an important role. We need her guidance to build empathy, understanding, and harmony through respectful conversations with our friends, family, and fellow citizens. So thank you, Deborah, for being here, and welcome you and Sarah to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's so great to see you all. And thank you, Deborah, for inviting me to talk to you today about how we talk.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, of course.
By the way, I mailed that book to the editor yesterday. This is a celebration. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Congratulations. So I just wanted to start off with addressing, I think, the broad issue that has brought many of us into this room, I think, which is that conversation is very difficult, right? It's very unpredictable. You know, sometimes we have interactions that feel very natural and effortless. We feel like we're connecting with the other person. And at other times, for some reason, we have conversations that feel extremely awkward and uncomfortable. And in worst case scenarios, like can even unravel into an argument, right? And this happens even when we have good intentions, you know, to be friendly and considerate and connect. Why is it that some conversations are so much more difficult than others and lead to so much misunderstanding?
I'm glad you started with the positive as well.
Yes.
I sometimes say a perfectly tuned conversation is a vision of sanity. You know, you feel you're okay and the person you're talking to is okay, all's right with the world. But when you say something and you know you've intended it one way, somebody thinks you're saying something else, yeah. By the way, I wish I had a way to address the horrible things going on and the kinds of conversations that are being so difficult now, and I'm not sure I can do that, but I can talk about what often goes wrong without our realizing why. And for me, it all goes down to a concept that I call conversational style. I wish I had come up with a more technical term for it, because that seems kind of superficial. Another thing I often say, conversational style isn't something added on like icing on a cake. It's the very stuff of which the cake is made. So you're going to say something. You're going to have to pick some speed at which you speak, some loudness or softness, some level, pitch, intonation patterns, how direct or indirect are you going to be? If you're going to tell a story, what would you tell a story about? How are you going to get to the point? And all these decisions, you don't stop and think about that, you just do it. Well, you learn all of that, you take it for granted from where you grow up. And so it's influenced by all the influences that I call culture, part of the country. My first, people think of me as a gender expert, I was not. It was cross-cultural differences, and it was New York compared to California that I started with. And I'll just give you an example of the kind of thing I encountered right away. This was my dissertation, by the way, in Berkeley, and I was just tape recording all the conversations that I was having at the time, and then I selected one. It was a Thanksgiving dinner conversation. Myself, my best friend, his brother, two of his friends, one from Los Angeles, one from, both coming from Los Angeles, Southern California, and his former wife, who was British. So, different styles. My goal was, I was going to figure out everybody's conversational style and the effect that it had on the conversation. Well, I'm from Brooklyn. My best friend and his brother are from the Bronx, New York Jewish background. The Californians, one was Irish, one was Italian Protestant, and the British woman, interestingly, had a Jewish father, but they all, I never could tell you what their conversational style was, because they had a very hard time getting the floor. Now, it wasn't that they didn't talk. They talked a lot, but they would have to wait, and they might get a turn to tell a story. And then we'd all be quiet and hear the story. So they did talk, but they couldn't be part of the flow. And when the three of us New Yorkers were enthusiastically talking with each other, there was no place they could get in. So I sometimes talk about this as anytime two people talk, it's about taking turns, right? You talk, the other person talks. How do you know when their turn is done and it's your turn to begin? How do you know they have nothing more to say? Well, several things, intonation pattern, but also how long a pause is normal before you start to talk. The tiniest difference can end up with somebody not being able to get the floor. So just imagine, one person is expecting this much pause. The other one's that much pause. This comes first. And this person starts thinking, well, I guess you have nothing to say. And especially if they're well-intentioned, they don't want an uncomfortable silence, they'll take the floor. And that happens again, and it happens again. And you end up with, you're not giving me a chance to talk, you only want to hear yourself talk. And on the other hand, why are you making me do all the work here? Don't you have anything to say? So it's an emblematic example of conversational style. You don't think of it as conversational style, you're just having a conversation. And you take for granted what you know is the way things work. And it's that little tiny thing. And you would think, you live together, you spend more time together, you figure it out. I can't tell you how many couples tell me, this explains what is going on between them. I'll give you an example. So I had a colleague from Detroit, and I learned over time that when I talked to him, and I thought he had nothing to say, I had to count to 7. And he might actually start to talk, amazing. His wife was Chinese from Hawaii, and she was always accusing him of interrupting. She said, you ask me a question, and you don't give me a chance to answer. You ask another question before I can even answer. They did research in an Athabascan community in Alaska. There are many Native American communities, especially Athabascan, where silence is very valued and very long pauses are normal. She was interrupting everybody in Alaska. They were teaching in Alaska, and Ron, my colleague Ron, put it on a midterm exam. They had invited me up there, and so I had spent some time up there and went to an Athabascan village just inside the Arctic Circle. And he asked his students on the midterm, because they had read all my work about this, Deborah Tannen went to Fort Yukon. What do you think was her experience there? And most of them said probably no one would talk to her because she wouldn't be quiet long enough. Actually, what happened is they don't talk to strangers. And I had the name of the missionary that I wasn't going to use, but I couldn't go a whole day without talking, so I called the missionary. But one person on that exam said he was from the northernmost village in the Arctic Circle. And he wrote, people in Fort Yukon talk so fast, she probably fit right in. So it's relative. And everything about conversational style, it's relative to the person that you're talking to. So that's just one thing.
Yeah.
Should I go on the next 50 minutes with you?
I mean, that ties in very neatly into kind of the next topic that I want to delve into, which is two specific types of conversational styles that you write about in You Just Don't Understand, high considerateness and high involvement, right? And these are the two styles where you see this coming into tension, like when do I come in and like you're interrupting me, but like I'm wondering if we could just talk a little bit about those styles and how exactly they come into conflict a bit more.
Yeah, great, thanks. So we all want to be involved when we talk, and we all want to be considerate of the other person. But which are you going to put emphasis on? And this is not a personal decision, it's a style. So the style that I call high involvement, the emphasis is on showing your involvement. So not letting there be a silence, that's an example of that high involvement. You're relatively direct, that's a sign of high involvement. You trust other people to say what they want to say. You would stand relatively closer. So if a high involvement person talks to a high considerateness person, they get closer, they move further, they get closer. You might end up going down the hall. I was talking to somebody at Georgetown. If you know Georgetown, there's a circular staircase, and I suddenly realized I'd pushed him. He was backing up so much that he was going to go down the stairs. If somebody in the conversation isn't talking, are you going to make space for them, or are you going to trust them to find space for themselves? I'm going to mention something that got a lot of attention when it, actually, of all the things I've written, it's the one thing that went viral. When you're talking, do you think only one voice should go at a time? Or do you think listeners might talk a bit to show that they're listening, to show they're actively engaged? Because accusing somebody of interruption is a very negative thing. And it's, in fact, you'll read all over the place. Interruption is terrible. If you interrupt, you're a bad person. Well, there are two terms that I use for this. You can tell if you look at a transcript when two voices are going at once. It's an overlap. But that doesn't tell you it's an interruption, because there are many conversational styles. It's a cultural difference and a regional difference, where the listener talks along to show involvement and engagement. So that's cooperative overlapping. And it was one of the high involvement style features that happened. So somebody's talking and they think only one person can talk at a time. A cooperative overlapper starts, it's kind of, you could say something, oh yeah, I know just what you mean. Does that mean you want to take the floor, or does that mean, yeah, I'm listening? Mm-hmm. Very often, if the person means it as cooperative overlap, but the other one doesn't understand, isn't comfortable with that style, doesn't recognize it, they stop and they feel interrupted. But the interruption isn't created by the one who started, it's a joint production. It's the combination of somebody started and somebody stopped. So this, and I actually had a piece in the New York Times about it, that got a lot of attention, but somebody picked up, this is very interesting. In my academic writing, I called it cooperative overlapping. In my general audience books, I wouldn't use a technical term like that. I would say talking along to show involvement. Well, someone got a hold of one of my academic books and made a little TikTok about it. Oh. And the fact that it had a technical term is what captured people's imagination. And one after another, people were putting up videos. You know, I grew up and people always accused me of interrupting, and I knew I didn't mean to do that. And now I know it's cooperative overlapping. The fact that it had a name. And so that you got, you know, I'm from New York, or I'm Jewish, I'm Armenian, I'm African American, I'm French, I'm Lebanese. All of these cultures use this style. Indian from India. And each one was saying, I'm so relieved. People were accusing me of interrupting. I knew I didn't mean to. And now I know it's cooperative overlapping.
Yeah, you were just having an engaging conversation, and
Yes,
interruption
yes.
is a part of that sometimes.
Yes, and it's so emblematic of the issue that we're starting to talk. This is the relationship to difficult conversation. You don't think in terms of conversational style. You don't walk away from a conversation and say, you know, I think that was a little awkward because I think you may expect a quarter-second shorter pause than I do. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, that was a bit uncomfortable. You're a cooperative overlapper and I'm not. You're interrupting me.
Yeah.
You're interrupting me. No, I didn't mean, yes, you did. You interrupted me. Or, you know, as I said before, you're not giving me a chance to talk, or why aren't you doing your part here? Yeah. So it's that we end up accusing, and whether we say it or not, feeling the other person has done something negative to us, rather than it's something about our styles.
Yeah, that's such an interesting like mind frame for these like conflicts we might have with people, right? Because we often do come away, as you say, like feeling maybe critical of the other person, or maybe even like self-critical, like why didn't I speak out enough? Well, maybe you're a high considerateness speaker and you just weren't speaking and weren't able to get your say. But this, I think, presents a much more like neutral framework, right? Like this conflict happened not because one of you is like a bad person or like wants all the attention. It's because like there is a difference in styles that are just coming into conflict.
Yes, and it does give you a way to deal with it. As I said, once I realized that I should count to 7 if I'm talking to someone who doesn't have that fast pace, that's something you can do about it. And if you're talking to someone who doesn't realize that they have to wait to 7, you can push yourself to start speaking more quickly and be astonished that they're happy with it. You know, they do stop talking and listen to you. So knowing that you can make those adjustments gives you, as Anne said in her introduction, gives you a way that you can correct for it.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about pausing so far as a conversational signal. I'm wondering if you could talk about some of the other main signals and how they affect the way communication like works between two people.
Great. Let me tell you this I'll start with an anecdote.
Okay.
So I was talking, I like anecdotes, yeah. I was talking to a friend from South Carolina, and I asked her about somebody we both knew but didn't know too well. I asked her what she thought of this guy, and she said, well, I don't really know him. And I said, I think he's a jerk. And she said, that's what I just said. And I said, huh? And she explained to me, in South Carolina, you can't say somebody's a jerk. You have to proceed on the assumption that if you knew them, you would find something to like. So I don't really know him means I haven't found anything to like. I could see the logic, but I wasn't totally convinced. It's just by chance, not that long after, I was at a reception, met somebody for the first time. He said he was from South Carolina. So, research. I said, what would it mean if you asked someone what they thought of someone, and they said, I don't really know him? He said, that means he's a no good, no count. Anybody here from South Carolina? Does it ring a bell? Well, it did for him. But the reason it comes to mind is, what is she going to think of me saying, I think he's a jerk? You can't say that. And I'm saying it. And I think that's where a lot of this negative attribution comes in. So on the one hand, you get you saying you told me something, but you never told me. And she thinks she did because it was indirect. And on the other hand, you're some kind of nasty bulldozer. Very early on, a long time ago, do you remember you wouldn't remember. Anybody remember the Fred Fisk show? That long time ago. And I talked about conversational style. I had a student from Texas, and she sent a tape, when it used to be a little cassette, sent to her mother in Texas to tell her mother what she was doing. And her mother listened to the whole thing, and then she said, yeah, but what she didn't mention is those people up north have no manners, which is how you think about it. And to try, and another time I had a similar thing. I was being interviewed for Voice of America. Arlene Francis, again, going back a long time, if that name means anything. And the whole time I was explaining, this is another way of being polite. It's high involvement. You're showing you're a good person by showing your interest and your enthusiasm. And so I thought I made such a good case the whole time. It was about New York. And she said over the air on Voice of America, and if you come to this country and you talk that way, I'll be very mad at you. So it's hard to convince, it's hard to believe that something doesn't mean what you would mean if you talked in that way. It's an emotional reaction.
Right, we all have these ways of reading
Right.
messages in what is not said, but what we think is expressed, right?
Right. I'll give one more just quick
Yes, yeah.
intonation pattern.
Yes.
So
yeah.
this one was not me. It was a college. I read an article in a journal, but it captures something. So the person who wrote this, he was teaching ESL and was explaining to the students in the class that when you're speaking English, you have to be careful of your intonation because that communicates a lot about your intention. So he explained, for example, German speakers, often when they speak English, they sound very peremptory because the intonation goes down where ours would go up. And a German student was in the class, raised his hand and said, give us perhaps an example. And what he reported was he had just said that he knew it's not intended, and what he said was, I felt my ire rise because it's emotional.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference, like the way someone comes
Yes.
off, just like a little pause or something in the way, the pitch makes a huge difference, right?
And interesting too, I mean, if it's face, if your person's there, you also go by facial expression,
Oh,
body.
yeah.
But so much now is texting and you just don't have that signal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much to read into like the absence of an exclamation mark or like an excessive emoji. Like that's a whole other like conversation, I feel like. Yeah.
But it's quite parallel to what happens in speaking. Yeah, for many people, if you don't have the exclamation point, if you have a period, that means you're angry.
Yeah, my
So be careful.
generation tends
Yeah.
to perceive it that way, but
Right.
I've been trying to put in the periods more to be taken more seriously. I don't know. Yeah. We'll see if it works. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And you have to find the sweet spot between if you don't do it, you're going to be seen as too severe.
Right,
And if
yeah.
you do it too much, you're going to be seen as not serious. So you've got to get it just right. And it might be different for the people you're talking to, so there is no just right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really hard to like know how exactly we come off in a conversation when we're in the middle of it, right? I'm just wondering if you have any advice for folks who maybe want to get greater awareness of how they come off, like, and maybe get a better understanding of what conversational styles they're using, how long they're pausing, things like that.
I think once you know what the parameters are, you almost automatically become an observer. Just this term, I'm teaching a class at Georgetown, cross-cultural communication, and we're already going over all these things of conversational style. It's just been 3 weeks, and all these students are already telling me, I didn't know I did that, now I realize it. And I've talked to my roommates, and they're pointing out. So you realizing it, you begin to make adjustments. So an example is one was, we did an exercise in class where they practiced one trying to get closer and the other trying to, anyway, she said it made her realize she really is comfortable getting close. And she said to her roommate, telling her roommate about it, yeah, and I never knew this, and her roommate said, that's the first thing I noticed about you. but you don't talk about that sort of thing. Yeah.
Right.
So I think just knowing what the parameters are, you automatically become, but I suppose it varies by personality, whether you're inclined to adjust a lot or not. If it's not comfortable adjusting, you can what we call meta communicate. You can talk about the communication with the person.
As in, like, I'm not unhappy to see
Right.
you. I just speak in a monotonous voice.
Right.
Yeah, or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, being explicit
I
about
know you
that.
must think I'm a monster, but I'm
No.
not.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary, like, just those little things. But I do want to kind of move on to, some of the differences we already touched on a bit about, like, between people of different cultural backgrounds. And sometimes people speak differently because they come from, like, one person's from New York, or one person's from California, or, like, you have different nationalities. Could you give us some more examples, maybe, about how those differences play out?
Well, and a lot of it is the pacing, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
Indirectness versus directness is huge, just huge. I'll give you an example that could be regional, but it also could be gender. And it's a little more complicated than just one little thing. But so this actually was told to me by I was being interviewed by someone, and the person was, I think, a TV host. Off the air, he said, "Now maybe you can explain this to me." He said, my wife and I were driving home from somewhere, and she asked me, "Are you thirsty, dear? Would you like to stop for a drink?" And I wasn't, so I said no. And then she was annoyed at me. And why is she playing games with me? Why didn't she just tell me if she wanted to stop? And I said, it's kind of a long story. I didn't know, I wasn't there, but I was pretty sure. When she said, "Would you like to stop for a drink?" she probably didn't expect a yes/no answer. She probably expected something more like, "I don't know, how do you feel about it?" And then she could say, "I don't know, how do you feel about it?" And then they could make a decision taking everybody's feelings into account. So you might end up, "Would you mind, if you're really tired, it's okay. That would be all right if we don't." Or it might be, "Well, I don't want to, but if you want to, that's fine." Or it could be, "How strongly do you feel about it?" So the key is really not so much whether or not you stop for a drink. The key is whether or not you take the other person's preferences into account. And if you ask expecting that kind of negotiation, it's almost like you have to start a certain kind of conversation to get to the point where you can say what you have in mind. And if it never gets to that point, you never say what you have in mind. So she was opening up that conversational space, and he was shutting it down. So he was showing like he didn't care. Now, I actually did a long study of the workplace. Something very similar was going on in the workplace. There were two corporations where I just went to work every day for over a month in each place and got to know people. They tape recorded themselves. I had them in the nice, shadowed them. And I talked to a manager who said, "Yeah, if I just make a decision and I assume if anybody doesn't agree with it, they're going to tell me." So, yeah, some people will and some people won't. There was a decision, this was a woman manager, and while I was there, the upward evaluations came through, and someone who was reporting to her complained, "You don't listen to us." And she was puzzled because she's always asking for their input, and I had observed it myself. She was one of the people I was shadowing. She was always asking for input. That was the problem. This person thought when she asked for input, she was asking him to decide. And then she didn't do what he suggested. He didn't frame it as a suggestion. He heard it as, "You're asking me what to do. And I told you, and you don't listen to me." And I think similar things can come up off the workplace, but the implications are very significant in the workplace. And this was kind of a gender thing. Another manager who hadn't had women working for him before, his approach was hire good people and get out of their way. And at one point, these two women came and they were very upset. You seem not to like what we're doing, and if there's a problem, please tell us. And he said, there's no problem. Why do you think there's a problem? Well, you never tell us it's okay. You never talk to us. You never. So what he thought was sending a signal, you're doing great, I got out of your way, communicated, something's wrong, I'm not connecting with you at all. Mm-hmm. So that's a couple of examples of the kind of other thing that can create trouble.
Yeah, I mean, you've written a whole book and more about the conversational style differences between men and women, right? And how much those styles like shape people's relationships. I believe that book also saved some people's marriages, you say? I don't know. But I'm just wondering if you could dive into maybe some of the examples of differences that really resonated with readers at the time when this was out and kept it on the bestsellers list for so long.
Yeah, it's still my best-selling book all these years later.
Yes.
And I still hear from people saying it saved their marriage. So I didn't start out thinking I was writing a self-help book, but I'm very happy it turned out that way. So, some of the things that rang bells from that book. One of the things that totally surprised me, the whole cultural icon of why don't men like to stop and ask for directions? That came from that book.
Wow.
Before I put it in there, I would never heard of it. And that just rang bells, and that was picked up. The way I explained it, I just talked about it because the pattern I ended up seeing was that any conversation could be approached from the question, is this bringing us closer or pushing us farther apart? Or is it putting one of us in a one-up and the other one-down position? And those are always in everybody's mind all the time. But often women are more inclined to focus on, and it's not the individual woman, it's the way we've learned to talk. Focus on, is this getting us closer or pushing us farther apart? Where the guys are more likely to be asking, is it putting me in a one-up or one-down position? Lots of examples of that. I was walking with, obviously after I wrote the book, I was walking with a colleague on campus, chilly fall day, and one of our older colleagues, guy, appeared, and she said, hi, so-and-so, where's your coat? And he said, thanks, Mom. And she and he walked on, and she said, what was that about? I said, that was about whether you're asking, are we bringing closer, or are you asking about the status? And it's true that moms say to kids, where's your coat? Where are your glasses? Mm-hmm. Another just quick anecdote, a guy who called his wife and said, my high school friend is in town, and I'm going to be meeting him for drinks on Friday night. And she said, well, why didn't you check with me first? Maybe I had some expectations for Friday night. And he said, I can't tell my friend. I need to ask my wife for permission.
Okay.
Now, are you going to define it as permission? I have to ask my wife? Or we're connected. What one of us does affects the other person. So I'm just going to, and I think you could look at it as, look how lucky I am. I have this partner I have to check with. Or look how unlucky I am. I have to get permission. So all these things can have these different. Anyway, that was my reason for the asking directions. And it's so funny. I mean, my research method is I talk to people and I get their examples. So I had asked my friend of mine, her name was Susan, how about you and your husband Wes? Anything come up? She said, yeah, it frustrates me that he won't ask directions. And so we'll drive around. It doesn't happen anymore. Now you have the GPS. But some people won't listen to the GPS because I know better. And sometimes they're right. GPS can send you wrong. But back then, and I said, well, why does he say he doesn't? He says, well, if you ask somebody directions, they're probably going to tell you the wrong thing anyway. And you learn a lot driving around the neighborhood. So something about stopping and asking seemed to have different meaning for the two of them. On one hand, you're going to make a fleeting connection to a stranger, you get where you're going to lose anything. The other is you're putting yourself in a one-down position to the stranger. And realizing he's not going to want to tell you he doesn't know. And that's true for many people. He'll make something up rather than tell you he doesn't know. So that was the story behind that one. Another one that got a lot of attention. Well, there's this nonverbal thing, and it's amazing how many bells that one rang. How I actually first got thinking about gender, because it was not my field. I was part of a study. Somebody had gotten a grant, and he was studying how best friends talk. And so he had best friends of 5, 10, 15-year-old and college students. And then he invited a bunch of us from different disciplines to look at his videotapes and analyze it. And at the time, I was interested in repetition. So I was going to look at how they picked up each other's words and weave it into their own. But I saw this nonverbal pattern that was overwhelming at every age, little ones, big ones. The girls were like this.
Like facing each other.
Yeah, and they were leaning in and kept looking at each other the whole time. And the boys were like this. They were at angles or even parallel. And it was so well coordinated. If one looked over, that one looked away. And if this one looked over, he looked away. So they didn't have to look directly at each other. And it went through all these ages. So that just, it was amazing. So I've talked about that, and I had videotapes at the time, and I would show when I talked about it. So many people have told me, now I understand. The biggest complaint from women about men they're close to is, he doesn't listen to me. And a woman, I remember one time, again, somebody from the audience said, my husband doesn't listen to me. And I'll say to him, oh yeah, what did I say? And he can tell me. But I know he wasn't listening. And it's because he wasn't looking. And so many couples have told me, the guy, oh, that's why she keeps thinking I'm not listening when I am. Because it feels like if you don't stop and look, that you're not listening. Right. And I actually was talking to a colleague friend who was a family therapist. And she said, the same thing happens when I see couples in therapy. The men don't look at their wives. The men don't look at me. The men are always disengaged. A therapist. But what else is she going to go on? If she was looking around, it would mean she was disengaged. So it's a reminder, again, how important it is to realize other people may not mean or feel what you would mean or feel if you spoke in that way at that time. One more gender one?
Sure. Mindful of time,
yeah,
but yes.
Okay, good. This is something that is talked about quite a bit, but I'm not the only one to have talked about this. But end of the day, and you come home, and the woman is telling what happened, who I talked to, and what that made me think, and what that made me feel, and how was your day? And he says, same old rat race. But then you go out with a bunch of people, and he is regaling the whole group with something interesting that happened. And she feels, what am I, chopped liver? I actually encountered somebody just like that. A women's group had invited me to speak, but they had their men with them for that evening. And there was a couple sitting on the couch, and it was very noticeable because she didn't open her mouth once, and he talked a lot. Questions, comments, nothing intrusive at all, but he talked a lot. And then I made this comment, I told exactly what I said now, and he said, that's absolutely right. She's the talker in our family. At home. And people kind of laughed because they had seen that. And he said, but it's true. She talks all evening. If she didn't, we'd spend the evening in silence. So when does talk come into its own? And again, there are lots of differences. There's cultural differences that plenty of families, the men are doing all the talking. It's nothing about women and men is 100%. If it was 100% versus 0%, there'd be nothing to talk about. You would just know it. But the tendency is, so for women, it seems, we have to watch what we say. You might say the wrong thing and someone might think ill of you. You might say the wrong thing and hurt somebody's feelings. You might be talking too much, and they might think you're talking too much. So we're very cautious about talking in groups, in public. But now, here's somebody I'm close to. Talk is the glue that holds the relationship together. That's another thing I often say. And you'll see little girls, they talk, telling secrets. So that sitting and talking is the glue that holds the relationship together. And so she's been talking to her friends, and that shows we're close. So this should be a new and improved version of a best friend. And he's not telling me things, and that's, feels like cutting off the closeness.
Right.
Now, guys, you've got to talk in public to hold your own, to let people know that you have something to say. And again, a lot of differences, not everybody, but now you're home, you're free not to talk. I've talked all day at work. I've had to, be careful what I was saying and try to come across now nothing to prove.
Yeah.
We're together, we're doing things together, that's closeness. But for her, it's the talk.
Right. One last question before we turn to the audience for Q&A. So as Anne acknowledged at the beginning, we're kind of having this conversation at a time of really great division in this country, right? And I know we're not going to get too much into your political views or anything like that, but I was wondering how you feel that greater awareness of the way we speak, conversational styles, all of this that we discussed today, how that can help us overcome our divisions and come together.
I don't think there's anything I can say about ways of talking that are going to overcome all divisions or the depth of the divisions that we're having now. But I think conversations can be exacerbated when you have these different conversational styles. So, for example, there are definitely many people who feel that as aggressive as you can be, the better. That's a sign of respect. I'm going to say what I think in the most extreme form, and I'm going to tell you that what you're saying is stupid, and that's a sign of respect. And for other people, that's so insulting, it shuts down the conversation. So I think there are that level. These conversational style differences, it affects people's vision of the other person as a person, because we're not just listening to what people say, we're thinking, who are you? And we're drawing conclusions based on ways of speaking. So I think awareness of conversational style can go a long way toward preventing some of the hostility at that level. But the fundamental differences, I think the only way you get past that is actually getting to know somebody. I don't think that happens just in a conversation.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for speaking with me. Would love to hear questions from the audience now.
I think there are mics coming around.
Oh, cool.
I'll do this side first.
Hello, Dr. Tannen. My question is about how to navigate the tension to conform or assimilate to the dominant speaking style versus staying true to your own. Specifically, I'm talking about being a woman in a female majority workplace, but where men are in leadership positions. And in emails, I want to use hedging, I want to use please, I want to use exclamation points. But I understand that could make me be taken less seriously. But on the other hand, if I write like a man, I could be perceived as blunt and rude.
Yep. And that word that starts with B. You're putting your finger on something that, again, I didn't originate this idea. One of my professors did, Robin Lakoff, recently passed away, the double bind. And a double bind is worse than a double standard. A double standard means you're held to a higher standard. It's not fair, but you can meet that standard. A double bind is a situation where you have two requirements, but anything you do to fulfill one actually violates the other. And that's what women in the workplace are dealing with. If you talk in ways expected of a woman, you're not taken seriously. if you talk in ways expected of a person in authority, you're a bitch. You're too aggressive. You're seen as too aggressive. So that doesn't tell us what we should do or can do. I think every person finds some middle path, some combination. And again, meta-communication, I think, can help. An example of that, this was somebody that, she was a couple of years out of grad school, and, undergrad. And she was working in a place, and there was an intern assigned to her, and she was working with the intern, they got along fine. And then after a period of time, they had one of those conversations that you have, what did you think of me when you, in the beginning? And he said, I thought you were a bitch. And she said, what? And he said, yeah, your emails, they were so harsh. That's what you're referring to. No exclamation points and no no emojis. And she said that she said to him, welcome to the workplace. But unfortunately, it was welcome to the workplace for her too, that double bind. So I'm not telling you what you can do, but
Thank you.
some combination. People with a microphone?
I've got the mic. So as a linguist, I've noticed over the last hour or so and something, I noticed on a tour of Cambridge this summer, a linguist, undergrad at, I think it was at Oxford, and grad at Cambridge. What do you think about the gross misoveruse of the word like? I mean, I used to think it was a generational thing that younger people use it, but I have friends in their 50s. I can't concentrate on the conversation because every other word out of their mouth is like. And it's just such a big pet peeve of mine. I'm sure not the only one, but yeah. I noticed
like
you didn't say the word like once,
like you
which
could
I
just
applaud you.
ignore it, like, people just, like they just throw it in. It doesn't really mean.
I mean, how do you,
I
when someone
tend
has a
to-
conversation like that, how do you kind of be polite and respectful of someone that every other word out of their mouth is like?
I think of a colleague who said his daughter was a native speaker of like English. And then a couple of years later, I asked him, and he said, no, she doesn't do that so much anymore. As a linguist, we tend to assume if people are doing something, it's doing something for them. And other people are talking that way, and so they're talking the way people they identify with talk. And the best thing, if you could possibly do it, is just let them do it and try not to be bothered by it. I mean, I'm irritated by people saying, I'm irritated by people saying, okay, at the end of every sentence, or right. But then I say to myself, no, you're a linguist. People throw these words in because they throw these words in because other people are doing it. So if at all possible, we should just cut them some slack. That's my take on it.
Thank you.
Now, if you were training someone, she's going to go into the workplace, and this could have a bad effect, make a bad impression on her colleagues at work, then there's reason to say, cut back on it. The same is true with rising intonation. Many people will talk about that. So it sounds like a question, even though it's a statement. And that too, it's women tend to do it more than men. Younger kids tend to do it more than older. But it's a way that people talk. Many of my colleagues analyze it as insecurity. Is that all right with you that I'm saying this? I think it's asking for a response. It's that connection thing again. Because when your voice goes up, your hearer is inclined to go, uh-huh. But that would not be a bad thing to cut out if it's getting in the way of your advancement at work, for example.
Yeah.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi. We've known each other a bit.
Another sociolinguist.
Yeah. So anyway, one of the many questions I have is I've noticed more and more that in trying to initiate a conversation, I don't always notice when people have things in their ears. And and sometimes they're talking and they think they're talking to me, but they're really talking to somebody. And then the other thing that's happening that's really quirky and a sign of our times is mostly they're talking to their dogs. In my neighborhood, the conversations begin with addressing the neighbor's dog, and then maybe. So if you have any insights into navigating that minefield.
Yeah, there's no solution to that. You don't know if they're talking to you. But I think talking to dogs is great. I actually once wrote a paper called Talking the Dog. And that was a study I did of families, and there were two families that, again, it was the same model design that I had with the workplace. They carried or tape recorders for a week and recorded everything they said. And they were using the dog to communicate to each other. But it was effective. For example, a woman was annoyed her husband left the door open. So she said to the dog, who was a little pug, and baby talk, which they use for the dog, you're going to have to protect us. He's even letting the criminals in. And lots of examples like that. So I think dogs are a great conversation opener. I'm sorry I don't have one.
Would you comment on the use of one's hands while talking? When does it help? When does it hurt? Immaterial? Whatever.
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, it's high involvement style. And I have two anecdotes for that one. I was in some, again, place I was in, there were kids in the audience from high school. And one of them said he thought I was insecure, that I didn't feel I could express myself without my hands helping. Students of mine accused a guest speaker of being rude. And I said, why? Because she was talking with her hands. So it's like everything else. In your style, it's normal, it's part of life. You've heard the jokes about Italian, if you make him, if his hands are taken, he can't talk because he needs the hand. And I had lived in Greece, and I've done research on Greek. And I was at a conference with someone said, well, you must have spent a lot of time. I can see because you were in Greece, you talk with your hands. I said, I learned that in Brooklyn. I didn't have to go there. But yes, it's such a key thing for, if it's normal and you don't do it, you wonder why people don't have the expected enthusiasm. And if you don't expect it, you wonder what's their problem.
Hi. Thank you for having this talk with us.
Can I see where the talk is coming from?
Hi, I'm over here towards the door. Thanks for having this talk with us. My question is for people who are at, say, the beginning of a relationship, and they're figuring out each other's communication styles and what might kind of get in the way of good communication. Do you have, or even communicating across those styles, do you have any strategies or exercises or tips for that?
Yeah, you should both read the book. And actually, a book I wrote called That's Not What I Meant. That's the style differences, geographic or the women and men, whichever. And each underline the parts that are important to you and then trade. But being able to meta-communicate and talk about it, I think, is the best thing. Are we allowed to take another question?
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. So in all of your expertise, knowledge, all of the years of study, who are the people that you still struggle to communicate with?
I don't know that I have an answer. I have no answer, sorry. Maybe I pride myself on finding some way to communicate with everybody.
Hi.
Can I see where the talk is coming from? Thank you.
Right over here. Good evening. Oh, sure. So I have studied a lot about empathy in terms of communication and how powerful that is in terms of making sure that there is mutual understanding, shared reality, that kind of thing. But what I'm noticing in the larger world is that with all this emphasis on asynchronous communication,
On what?
asynchronous. So, asynchronous, it's not
Asynchronous.
happening at the same time.
Asynchronous, yeah. thank
Yeah, people are using apps
Yeah.
to communicate, and even at the dinner table, they're talking on their devices with each other or with somebody else, and that kind of thing. And I'm curious how that gets in the way of communication, because with all this emphasis on they're recording their message and sending it, and then they think it's being received correctly, and then there's a response that's sent, again, asynchronously, so it's not at the same time. They're missing lots of verbal cues and nuances and so forth. How is that generally, that technological innovation affecting our communication as individuals?
Yeah, I know. I'm sure what you're saying is everybody here has noticed and felt bad about. Yeah. I'm astounded, and I don't know what to do about it. My students come in, and they come in early. The class starts at a certain time, and they start drifting in. Every single one of them is looking at their phone. And they're sitting right next to each other and not talking to each other. Now, I don't allow laptops in class during class. I'm tempted to say you can't use the screen once you're in the room, but I think they would really resent that. It's the way the world is, and I think what we can try to do is set up things as much as possible where people are face-to-face. And again, being understanding. Often the kids have their phones out at dinner because they're making plans for the evening at the last minute. And they expect an answer right away. So they're not being rude to you, they're avoiding being rude to their friends. Because if you don't answer quickly, you're throwing everybody into turmoil. Or you might miss something important, you might miss knowing about what's happening. So on the one hand, I preach, again, cutting everybody's slack and understanding why they're doing what they're doing. But on the other hand, you're putting your finger on, I think, a real problem.
I think we have time for just one more question.
I think she's handing a microphone back there.
Thanks so much. So you mentioned getting to know someone's communication style requires having a conversation with them. But I work in industries where it's very high stakes. You get to talk to someone one time, and if it's a misconnection, you don't get another chance. So I'm wondering what advice you would give in that situation to be able to understand the other person's style on the fly when there's a lot of cross-cultural, not only geographies, where they grew up, but also different industries, genders, et cetera.
Yeah, it's such a challenge. I'm thinking, for example, in a work situation, there are cultures where you have to get to know each other before you start doing business. You don't do business with strangers, so there's enough talk that you feel like you know each other. And then there's the cultures. Many Americans feel this way. We've got a short time. We've got business to do here. Let's get down to business. And so those different assumptions are mutually exclusive. People have talked about this. Again, I referred to my colleagues who did work with Athabascan communities, and they find that the stereotype of white people among the Athabascans is they act like your friend when they're not. They're so hypocritical. And on the other hand, you get the stereotype of the Stoney Indian that doesn't talk, because this basic assumption, you don't talk to strangers. You sort of hang around and get to know each other, and then you talk. But if you think the way you get to know each other is to talk, it's mutually exclusive. So, advice. If there's anybody who knows the person and can give you some hints beforehand, anything that you could surmise from what you know about their background or other experiences that they've had, or metacommunicate. We've only got a short amount of time here. I want to get this right. If anything I'm saying, doesn't ring right to you, please let me know. Something. I guess that's it.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Deborah.